And I am done. Okay, so I just finished reading up A Fracture in the Qwisdeep. This is the second book in the Jekua series by Travis Riddle, and I want to give you my unedited thoughts upon finishing the book, which was just now. So I really like this book. I'm going to give this a 4 out of 5 stars, and I just had such a fun time reading this book. But you probably have no idea what this book is because it's so small. So let me back up before I go into what I liked and didn't like about this book and give you a little bit of details about what this book's all about. So like I said, this is the second in the series. And this is essentially a Pokemon-inspired, low-stakes progression fantasy. Now, I said a lot of weird words there, and if you're really into fantasy, you kind of know what I'm talking about. But let me go into depth about what I mean. So this is essentially a Pokemon story without Pokemon. It's this entirely new world with entirely new animals and an entirely new system for how these animals are caught and how they're fought in a really innovative way. I'll go into that when I get into the fantasy elements of this book, but essentially think of this like a very Pokemon-inspired book. And for me, this is really fun because I've never read a book that was styled after Pokemon before. You know, I played the first Pokemon game when I was very young in middle school. I got an emulator on a Game Boy before it came out when it was just in Japanese, and me and my friends played it like crazy. But that's like the only Pokemon game I played until recently when my kids got a Switch and I played Arceus. But I have a lot of nostalgia around the Pokemon franchise. So to pick that up again, it really hit me in such like a positive spot where I had such a fun time reading this book. And that's essentially what I keep coming back to, was fun. That's what this book was. It was not the most complex book in the world. It was a rather simple book, but one that you could read in a very like calm setting, very low stakes, just a really enjoyable time. And I would recommend it to pretty much anybody. So the basic premise of this book is that you have these two best friends, a boy and a girl. And the girl is tasked with going on this religious quest where she has to go to these, and I think it's 7, but these 7 different shrines around the world. And there's some drama going on where the shrines are kind of under attack lately. So she needs to bring this Jekua trainer, somebody that can battle these animals with her to keep her safe. And she takes her best friend who wants to get into it. His grandma was one of the best champions of the world, and he's trying to get into it for the first time, so he goes along with her. And it's this journey where she's going on kind of this religious quest, and he's going to just tag along and catch these Jekua along the way. And it's a really fun premise that I thoroughly enjoy. Now, this is not like the pinnacle of fantasy. In a lot of ways, this is not the most amazingly well-written book. It's not bad by any means. It's passable. But I don't think you should pick up this book because you're trying to find like this super highbrow philosophical book. No. This is what you want to do when you're waking up, you got your coffee in the morning, just having a relaxing time. That's what this book is. And it succeeds in many ways for what it is. So let me go into the different aspects that I review my books and give some like mini scores within the overall score. So for the story, I'm going to give this story a 4 out of 5. It was very enjoyable, much more than the first book. The first book essentially was all set up. And there was a little bit of plot progression in it, but very little. This book just jumps straight up where the first one left off, and it's a very contained story, and it's way more refined. The main characters find themselves to get to this next shrine, having to go through this like nature preserve, where these endangered Jekua go to be in a safe habitat away from poachers and where they can thrive. And not a lot of people, go here. And so the one guy who's catching all these Jekua is having a great time because he gets to see and try to catch all these really rare Jekua. And it's just a really tight story. And that's really all this is about, is that journey from point A to point B. But it's not boring at all. There's some action that goes on into it. There's actually like a bad guy that shows up in this that there was not really previously. And it's really compelling. And I do enjoy that this tighter plot made it so the characters could progress at a much faster pace than happened before. You get a lot more depth of these characters. And it really shows up here because of the tight story. So yeah, good story. Overall, I liked it a lot. Let's move on to the world building. The world building is awesome. I am obsessed with this world. It's so entrancing, and it might be cheap because I don't know if it's because it's super well written, or I don't know if it's just the nostalgia blasting me in the face. But I can't get enough of it. It's so fun. I can't stop thinking about this story when I'm not reading it. I can't stop thinking about this world and how I want to visit all these different locations. I want to go along this story with all the characters to find out all the differences between all the villages, all the different places to go, all the Jekua they're going to catch. It's such an addicting, it's like crack in literary form. Super fun to read, and I blasted through this book. It's not a long book, but this world building is so entrancing that I just can't get enough of it. So yeah, super easy 5 out of 5 on the world building side. So let's go over to the other part of the story, which is amazing, and that is the fantasy elements. The fantasy elements are so good. It would be easy to make just a Pokemon ripoff, and in some ways that's what this is. But there's enough differences in it to make it a more fresh take. So if you're not into Pokemon, essentially what happens is you can catch a Pokemon by throwing this ball at it, and the ball can catch the Pokemon. They essentially live inside this little container, and you keep different ones, and you go to battle, and you throw one out, and it pops out, and they fight another one until they pass out. And when you think about it, there's a lot of like animal abuse that goes along with that, and it's kind of a dark story in a really bright setting. So this one solves a lot of those problems by not making these animals fight. Essentially, the main character has to creep up on these animals so they don't get scared, and he uses this technology that's on his wrist that essentially takes a copy of what that exact one was, and it can save it onto a disc, and so the animal never gets harmed. And when you want to go battle, your copy shoots out, and you have this mana system involved with each character who gets mana more and more as they get more powerful in this story. That's where the progression fantasy part comes in, as they get stronger and stronger, and they learn more moves from these Jekua. And that's part of it. They learn more moves as they learn more about the Jekua that's theirs. But it's a nice new way of capturing that's really fun. It adds tension to each time that they encounter one. And a really fun aspect to this fighting that doesn't feel so dark. It's really fun. And the main character goes into like a first-person perspective onto them as they're fighting. That adds another element to it. So overall, just super enjoyable to watch every time that you see one of these Jekua pop up. How they're caught, how they fight, super fun. I love it. So the characters, this is where the score starts dropping a little bit. And I think the characters are like a 3 out of 5. They're not the most well-written characters. They're very vanilla. And I say that because whenever conflict happens in the story, you essentially know exactly how the characters are going to react, because they're so obviously going to do that based on the archetype that they are built around. And that's not the worst thing in a low-stakes story like this. In fact, most of the low-stakes fantasy stories I've read have these kind of so-so characters. It almost feels like that's required for a story like this. Now, it doesn't have to be. You can make really, really deep characters that are really well written. That's not what this is. And I don't think that's what this story is trying to be. But the characters are just so-so. The main girl is just, wants to go on this religious quest and doesn't want anything to stop her. The other one is all he wants to do is become the most powerful Jekua trainer in the world, and nothing's going to get in his way. But their relationship with each other is growing, and I do enjoy that. I think that's making these characters more compelling. But their character growth internally, their own character growth, feels kind of stunted, and they're essentially the same characters as we started out the book with. So moving on to the next area of this book that I thought was not great, and it's the writing style. It's just okay. It's like a 3 out of 5. It's nothing special. You're not going to get this flowy prose. This is not the tip top of the fantasy genre. The vocabulary used is rather limited, and it feels like it's built for a younger audience. Now, I am certainly not a younger audience. You can tell immediately by the amount of hair that I have in my head that I am not young. But I got a lot of enjoyment out of this. And, you don't have to be a kid to really enjoy this story. Although I will say that I think kids that are into Pokemon could really enjoy this story as well. It could blend a lot of different age groups. So all in all, this is a great reading experience. So few people have read this book and rated it. I would implore you, check it out. It's a really fun story. I think you'll have a great time, and happy reading to you.